Hi, this is Brass Check, and I'm recording this on Friday, March 27th, and I was going to give myself a lot more time to prepare, but things are fast moving. I want to acknowledge Bob Dylan, who is always full of surprises, and today he just came out with a long, it's not really even a song. He's just talking about the assassination of John F. Kennedy and what it was really all about. I'm going to guess he doesn't think it was a lone gunman. So hats off to Mr. Dylan. You know, you really earned that Nobel Literature Prize. The timing may seem bizarre, and yet the timing is perfect because here we are in 2020, 60 odd years, 50 plus years after that dark day, and we still have a lot to learn. Now, I think at this point, there's barely an American with a pulse or two neurons that connect that doesn't realize Kennedy was not shot by a guy from an office book depository 5 stories up. Somebody might have been pulling a trigger up there, but the real fire came from multiple sources. And therefore it was a conspiracy. And one thing we know for sure, it was never investigated properly. So just think about this. The elected president of the United States of America had his brains blown out in broad daylight on a Dallas street. And all these years later, no real effort has ever been made to find the evildoers behind that and bring them to justice. And that has really set the pattern for American history. I mean, we weren't saints before that, but we've really gone into a dark place ever since. Kennedy was working on many initiatives, peace initiatives with Russia. He was also not really enthusiastic about a full-blown war in Vietnam, and he absolutely was pulling us out of there. And after he was killed, well, we went into that cauldron, killed over 50,000 of our young men, and at least 1 million Vietnamese civilians, and who got enriched by that? The military-industrial complex. Coincidence? I mean, fiscally, this country has still not fully paid the actual bill for that all these years later. Forget the evil of it and all the tremendous trauma caused there and here by it. And I'm not talking about demonstrators caused trauma, which is what the news media loves to talk about. I'm talking about the young men that came back ruined. Hundreds of thousands of them. Where do you think the heroin problem in the United States came from? And we've talked about this. I don't want to get too off the track because I want to focus on this. But one of the things that we did in Vietnam, and we had a whole show about this a couple of weeks ago, was we found the local warlords and we made the following deal with them. You get the opium heroin franchise for this district if you play ball with us. And who do you think they were selling that heroin to? And some of us may know of actual cases where non-commissioned officers were handing out heroin to keep their troops fighting because it was the only way they could keep them fighting. And by the way, everybody should know this. The Vietnam War was shut down by a mutiny, a positive mutiny of U.S. servicemen. That's what stopped the Vietnam War. Okay? And that's why we don't have a draft anymore. Because if they ever dared to put another draft on here, they're going to find out fast they can't carry these things out anymore. We're finished. We're done with it. But what they're doing is they're tanking the economy so that young people have no other choice but to, quote, volunteer for this very expensive killing machine that we're deploying all over the world. So let's step back a second and look at some perspective. So what's going on right now? Well, we have something called the CDC, whose job was supposedly to protect us against epidemics. That's their whole job. So you can look up their budget and you can see how many billions of dollars they get a year and how many tens of thousands of people they employ and how much political weight they throw around. And ask yourself the question, where were they on this coronavirus thing? They were not only not prepared, they actively interfered with anybody that in the United States that tried to develop or administer a test for it. That went on for weeks and weeks and weeks. Doctors and nurses will tell you there was none guidance from the CDC on how to prepare for this pandemic. Zero. And we've got quotes from at least one nurse saying, I have never seen anything like it. Never in my 35-year career have I seen something this big or even small without clear-cut guidance from the CDC. What kind of guidance is needed? How to recognize the symptoms, how to segregate the patients so that you don't contaminate healthy people or already sick people with this virus, how to know when the virus has passed. I mean, these are all sort of what kind of protective gear to wear and how to wear it. These are all fundamental CDC things, and they did absolutely nothing. Where have we seen this pattern before? Go back to 2008. The governor of New York State, I can't remember his name, Elliot Spitzer. Okay, yeah, he's a bit randy, he's an idiot. Okay, but what he was doing before they got him out of office was he was gathering all the governors in the country to stand up and say that the distortions and the fraud and the chicanery that was going on in the mortgage industry had to be shut down because the federal government was interfering with local states' ability to regulate the mortgage market. Okay, you can look this up. We did a video about it. He was leading the charge early enough that we could have done something about it to prevent that financial catastrophe we had in 2008. And he was calling out AIG and a lot of the fraudsters that were involved in that operation. And so what happened to him? Well, as our video, if you look at somewhere, it's on the internet. We make thousands of videos. I can't keep track of them all, but we said the political assassination of Elliot Spitzer. What did they do? Well, they track. You have to understand they track every public figure closely, and they've got a file on everybody who's a public figure, who they think could be of danger to them. And when it became clear he was going to be a danger to their little scam, they found his peccadillo, and they went after him. He left himself vulnerable. That wasn't really smart, but it's neither here nor there. So again, 2008, we had the FDIC, we had the Security and Exchange Commission, we had the Department of Treasury, we had all these people whose sole job is to make sure our economy is run more or less ethically and more or less intelligently. And they let the mortgage scammers, which included Goldman Sachs, included JP Morgan, included all these big banks, they let them run wild. And anybody that tried to stop them was eliminated. Let's look at another example. 9/11. A lot of our listeners are very familiar with the 9/11 story, but the fundamental story is something horrible happened. We still don't know exactly what happened. We know the buildings collapsed, and we know thousands of people were killed. We still don't have a public answer. The FBI was tracking the people. The CIA was assisting people from Saudi Arabia bypassing normal visa requirements. We had a video about that. The NSA was tracking these people. Sibel Edmonds was a translator working for the FBI, and she looked into some of the things that they had been tracking and recording, and the whole thing was obvious and on its way, and it was allowed to happen. And then they came out and said, oh, we had no idea this could have happened. Well, in fact, there have been many, many documents written about the fact that one could use private airplanes as missiles. And there was even a report on Bush's desk. So, I mean, we all know these stories. But here's another case. And then let's not forget the U.S. military. We have a air defense system, do we not? We've spent hundreds of billions of dollars on it, have we not? Its whole purpose is to protect the airspace of the United States and be aware of incoming missiles. It is completely capable of identifying rogue planes. And pre-9/11, if you had a plane and you were just flying around wild, you would eventually have fighter jets on your ass if you weren't starting to make a lot of sense to the control towers. That's a fact. You can look it up. But that day, everybody decided to take the day off. So we have this, and let's talk about Katrina, which wasn't Katrina. It was a mild hurricane in New Orleans. Who was supposed to be taking care of that? Well, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and FEMA. Well, we all know how FEMA did. They did nothing. They left 100,000 people stranded in the city without food or water for nearly a week. Really? We can bomb every country in the world, but we couldn't airlift water and food to people for an entire week? Same thing going on in Puerto Rico right now. So that's FEMA's job. And then U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Well, all that they were doing during the catastrophe and the flooding was on the news media covering their ass about the fact that the flooding in New Orleans came from over 50 levee failures. That's what they were doing. There were still bodies floating in the water while they were spending their resources lying to the American people about what actually happened. So that's the pattern we have. We have it right now. We have the CDC, monstrously failing. In the financial crisis, we had the SEC and all related agencies monstrously failing and actually interfering with the one guy that was trying to do something about it. 9/11, we have all these intelligence agencies, which we spend trillions of dollars on in the aggregate, doing nothing, and we have the air defense system suddenly just happened not to work. So that's part one of this. What's part two? Part two is none of the people responsible will even be mentioned or blamed or investigated or prosecuted. So you see the connection between the Kennedy assassination? Okay, he was supposed to be guarded by the Secret Service. There was supposed to be U.S. military intelligence people, as there used to be in those days and still is, on every single major presidential. Well, we don't even have major presidential appearances anymore, you realize, practically. But that was supposed to be. Those people were told not to show up. Local law enforcement people were told, don't show up. You're not needed. So we have people that are supposed to be doing their job not doing their job. A catastrophe occurs directly as a result of them not doing their jobs. And there's no investigation, there's no serious investigation. No one's brought to task. No one is punished. Not only that, the evildoers, for lack of a better phrase right now, are richly rewarded. All right, so we go back to 2008. Who made out like bandits? Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, all the companies that were 100% responsible for those mortgage scams. They got the money. You didn't get the money. What you got was the inflation. Do you see what happened to rent since 2008 all over the country? They got the money. You got the inflation. Did anyone go to jail? We know no one did. I mean, even Bush the first put some savings and loan bankers in jail, but we don't. But so anyway, they create the catastrophe, and they profit from the catastrophe. And by the way, you got to understand this so-called bailout that's going on. It's 90% for moneyed people, and the working people are getting crumbs. And the working people will be paying back that money with heavy interest in the following ways. Taxes are going to be raised after this. Essential services are going to be cut. This is not free money. You're going to pay for it. And you're going to pay for it incredibly. And you're also going to pay for it in inflation of everyday items, especially rent. Because all the money's going to go to the people that can buy up everybody's homes. Because you think there might be a few foreclosures in the middle of this thing? Who's going to have the money to buy them? The big banks. Who's going to be renting them out? The big banks. They're going to cut you. They're going to cut people a break. They didn't do it after 2008. They're certainly not going to do it now. So in 2008, the very people that created the catastrophe profit from it massively. We go to New Orleans. It's not so clear cut. I don't think U.S. Army Corps of Engineers profited, but they certainly weren't prosecuted. Nobody was investigated. Nobody was court-martialed, and that would have been the correct thing to do. FEMA, oh my God, I can tell you about a story. I'll tell you a story about New Orleans. The drug dealers in New Orleans had a holiday in the early days after Katrina because the FEMA workers were buying so much dope from them. Think about that. That's FEMA. But anyway, nobody was investigated. Nobody was prosecuted. Everybody still got their federal salaries. As far as I know, nobody had their career interrupted. Everything was fine. 9/11, well, the intelligence community, just endless, budgetary increases for them. Military, endless. Wars everywhere. We destroyed Iraq. Hey, Iraq was a rough place before we invaded them, but at least it functioned. People had water, people had electricity, people had schools, people had jobs. We destroyed all that. Same thing in Syria. I mean, Syria is unbelievable. The death and destruction there. Again, would I want to live in Syria as a Syrian under the Syrian government? Probably not. Would I like to see over 1 million of my fellow Syrians killed and over 10 million of them homeless and hundreds of thousands of businesses and economic operations destroyed? No, I think I'll take the annoying dictator. But those people didn't get that choice. Libya, again, Gaddafi, a lunatic. But you know what? Highest per capita of any African country. Now, there are literal slave markets in operation in southern Libya, where where Africans are being sold as slaves. That is now a new thing in Libya, thanks to our intervention, and on it goes. So that's what happened after 9/11. But taking it back to Kennedy and why this thing by Bob Dylan is just genius. I mean, he didn't write it to put it out now, obviously. He could have sat back and said maybe now's not the time, but you know what? Now is the absolute perfect time. We have to look these monsters square in the eye. We have to talk about them. We have to wake up. We have to do what we can to wake up our friends and neighbors and relatives. I mean, it's hard. You have to feed them one little spoon at a time. But the outcome of this catastrophic failure by the public health system in the United States, and we've done videos on that, okay? It appears that the main vector for transmission of this disease is hospitals. Sick person goes to the hospital, gives it to the healthcare worker. The healthcare worker gives it to other people in the hospital. Visitors go home with it. Workers go home with it and then give it to their families. And there's just little hints about that coming out now. And I have a feeling, and I'm out on a limb here because I don't have the numbers, but I have a feeling when all this smoke clears, what I am telling you is going to be what, in fact, the actual case is. This is a very, this disease loves hospitals. It loves closed spaces. It loves careless hygiene, um, and it loves people packed together in closed spaces. So when all this is over, um, Wall Street's going to be flush with cash. Though actually, in truth, I don't think there's enough cash in the universe to plug the hole that they created by shutting down the government, the economy. I don't know how, I just don't think even I think even Wall Street's going to suffer, but they're going to suffer less, and they're going to have cash to be able to buy the assets of the rest of us who are getting wiped out by this. Um, you won't see anybody in the CDC investigated. You won't see anybody in the CDC um, prosecuted, demoted, fired, disgraced. That's not going to happen. No, what's going to happen is they're going to get even more funding. They're going to be getting even more power. And I have a feeling where this power is leading is next year you're going to be told, not just your kids, not just your grandkids, you're going to be told, roll up your sleeves and take this hastily put together vaccine because it's for the good of mankind. And I have a feeling they're going to they have a very good chance of getting away with it. Because that's their mission. I hope everybody understands that. The CDC is a marketing arm of the vaccination arm of Big Pharma. That's what they do. That's what they exist for. They have this proves their absolute bungling of this proves that they have no interest in public health. And I don't have her name handy, but you can look this up. We can't tell this story too many times. The HPV vaccine, which is now mandatory in certain states for young girls, and has caused such havoc that at least two countries, Denmark and Japan, have had to set up clinics, regional clinics, just to deal with the number of young women that have been physically destroyed by it. That was rammed through after Merck almost went bankrupt with its Vioxx medication. They put out this medication, and I think it cost $250,000. I mean, some insane amount of deaths worldwide. And they had great deal of liability there. And so they needed another cash infusion, and they cooked up this, well, gee, if they get human papillomavirus, maybe it will lead to cervical cancer, and maybe we could say that we're preventing cervical cancer by giving young girls who aren't even sexually active the HPV vaccination. By the way, from what I understand, every place where this vaccination has been widespread, the rate of cervical cancer in young women has skyrocketed. But anyway, the monster, and that's really the only way to describe her, who was head of CDC, who rammed this thing through, went straight from the CDC to working at Merck in their vaccination wing. I mean, just straight to it, and lavishly paid, lavishly compensated. So that's what we've got here. We have a system where high-ranking officials do us in for a profit and then get personally rewarded for it. And we really need to put these people's names on a website. Photograph, name, profile, the description of what they've done to us. Somebody needs to do that. But I mean, Brass Tech can't do everything. I'm trying to keep up with all this stuff. But maybe that's something that we need more than anything else right now. Putting faces to names to acts so that Americans can see who these actors are. It's a system. And, the systems, every big organization ends up being an evildoer. I don't see an exception, but there are specific individuals that say, hey, I like this. I want to be part of it. I can see how I can feather my own nest by advancing the agenda of this corrupt system. We need to know who these people are and shine lights on them in a permanent, ongoing way. Um, anyway, that's my rant for the day. But hats off to Bob Dylan. This song is very timely, and it applies to everything that's going on today.